The stars burned with the light of dying ships as Queen Selithra watched her empire crumble through the cracked viewport of her royal flagship. She had ruled the Valorian Empire for 3,000 years, commanding billions of souls across 100 worlds. And now everything she had built was falling apart in a single night of fire and betrayal. Her crystalline skin, once radiant with the soft blue glow of her noble bloodline, was now dark and cracked from the wounds she had suffered. Blood, the color of liquid starlight, dripped from a cosa deep gash across her chest where an assassin's blade had found its mark. The Scourge Collective had planned their attack perfectly. They had waited until she was far from her throne world, traveling through the outer territories on a diplomatic mission. And then they had struck with overwhelming force. Her royal guard, the finest warriors in the empire, had fought bravely, but they were not enough. She had watched them die one by one, their bodies torn apart by enemy fire as they tried to protect her. Now she was alone on a crippled ship, drifting toward an insignificant blue planet on the edge of known space Earth. The primitive world her scientists had studied with mild curiosity and nothing more. The humans who lived there were considered barely intelligent by Valorian standards. Simple creatures who had only recently discovered how to leave their own atmosphere. They were not worth conquering or contacting. Just another young species that would probably destroy itself before it ever reached the stars. But now this worthless planet was her only hope. The ship shuddered and alarm screamed through the empty corridors as the engines failed completely. The Thuris dragged herself toward the escape pod, leaving a trail of glowing blood behind her. Every step sent waves of agony through her body, but she forced herself to keep moving. She was a queen, and queens did not lie down to die. The escape pod was small and primitive compared to the luxury she was accustomed to, but it would keep her alive long enough to reach the planet's surface. She sealed the hatch and launched into the void, just as her flagship exploded in a brilliant flash of light as she fell toward Earth. She wondered if this was how her story would end, not with glory and honor, but with a quiet death on an alien world, where no one would ever know her name. The pod screamed through the atmosphere, flames dancing across the hull as she plunged toward the surface. She barely managed to activate the landing systems before impact, and even then the crash was violent enough to knock her unconscious when darkness took her. She thought she would never wake again. Marcus Cole was not the kind of man who believed in fate or destiny or any of that nonsense. He believed in whiskey and solitude and the harsh beauty of the Nevada desert where he had chosen to spend what remained of his broken life. He had been a fighter once, one of the best in the world, a champion who had stood in the cage and defeated every opponent they put in front of him. But that was before the injury that shattered his spine and ended his career. That was before his daughter got sick, and the doctors told him there was nothing they could do. That was before his wife looked at him with empty eyes and said she could not watch him destroy himself anymore. Now he lived alone in a rusty trailer at the edge of nowhere, far from the lights and the noise and the memories that haunted him. He spent his days working on old cars and his nights drinking, until the pain in his back and the pain in his heart became quiet enough to ignore. He had not spoken to another human being in 3 weeks, and that was exactly how he liked it. The explosion woke him from a restless sleep. He sat up too fast and felt his damaged spine protest with a sharp stab of pain. But he ignored it as he always did. Through the dirty window of his trailer, he could see something burning in the desert. A trail of fire stretching across the night sky and ending in a cloud of dust and smoke. About a mile away, his first thought was that a plane had crashed and he should call for help. But then he remembered that his phone had been dead for months and he did not have the money or the desire to fix it. Grabbed his flashlight and his old hunting rifle and headed out into the cold desert night. The walk was hard on his body, but he had learned to push through pain a long time ago when he reached the crash site. What he found made him stop dead in his tracks. It was not a plane. The object, half buried in the sand, was like nothing he had ever seen. A pod of smooth metal that seemed to glow faintly from within. Strange symbols covered its surface. Symbols that were definitely not from any language on Earth. Marcus stood there for a long moment, his mind struggling to accept what his eyes were telling him. Then the pod's hatch opened with a hiss of escaping air, and he saw her. She was humanoid, but clearly not human, with skin that looked like it was made of living crystal, pale and translucent with veins of soft blue light running beneath the surface. She was beautiful in a strange and alien way, with features that were both familiar and completely foreign. She was also covered in blood and barely breathing. Every instinct told Marcus to walk away. This was not his problem, and getting involved would only bring trouble. He had spent years building walls around himself, protecting what was left of his broken heart from a world that had taken everything from him. But as he stood there, looking at this dying creature from the stars, he remembered the man he used to bet, the man who never walked away from a fight, who never abandoned someone in need, who believed that strength meant protecting those who could not protect themselves. He cursed it under his breath and slung his rifle over his shoulder. Then he bent down and carefully lifted the alien woman into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, as if her bones were hollow like a bird's, and her blood was warm and strange against his skin as he carried her back toward his trailer. Marcus Cole had no idea that he had just changed the fate of two civilizations. He was just a washed-up fighter doing what fighters do. He was refusing to let someone die without a fight. Queen Salithra woke to the smell of burning meat and the sound of a primitive radio, playing music she did not recognize. For a moment she thought she was still dreaming, caught in some fever vision brought on by her wounds. Then the pain hit her, and she remembered everything. The betrayal, the battle, the fall to this primitive world. She tried to sit up, but her body refused to obey, and she let out a sound that was part groan and part curse in her native tongue. A shadow moved across her vision, and she found herself staring up at the strangest creature she had ever seen. The human was large and muscular, with dark skin covered in scars and tattoos that told stories she could not read. His face was hard and worn, like stone that had been beaten by wind and rain for 1,000 years. He looked down at her with eyes that held no fear, only a tired kind of curiosity. "So you're awake," he said in a language her translator implant struggled to process. "I was starting to think you might not make it." Salithra tried to speak, but her throat was dry and raw. The human seemed to understand because he brought a cup of water to her lips and helped her drink. Liquid was crude and full of minerals, but it was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. "Where am I?" she finally managed to ask, her translator converting her words into the human language. "Middle of nowhere." "Nevada," the human replied. "Name's Marcus. And you crashed in my backyard about 2 days ago." 2 days. She had been unconscious for 2 days while her enemies hunted her. Salithra felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. "I must leave," she said, trying again to rise. "They will be coming for me." "Who's they?" Marcus asked, gently but firmly pushing her back down. "You're in no condition to go anywhere, so how about you tell me what's going on before I decide whether to help you or throw you back in the desert." She wanted to dismiss him, to command him to obey as she would command any servant in her palace, but she was not in her palace anymore. She was wounded and weak and completely at the mercy of this primitive creature who had saved her life for reasons she could not understand. So she told him the truth. She told him about the Valorian Empire, about the Scourge Collective and their violent rebellion, about the assassination attempt that had nearly ended her life. She told him that enemy hunters would already be searching for her. Using technology far beyond anything his world possessed, she told him that staying near her meant death. Marcus listened to everything she said without interruption, his scarred face revealing nothing of what he was thinking when she finished. He was quiet for a long moment. "So you're some kind of space queen," he finally said. "And bad guys from space are coming to kill you." "That is a simplified version." "But yes," Selythra replied, "and these bad guys, they have spaceships and laser guns and all that?" "Yes." Marcus let out a short laugh that held no humor. "Well, that's a new one," he said. "I've had some strange things happen in my life, but alien royalty in my trailer definitely takes the prize." "You must understand how dangerous this is," Selythra insisted. "Your kind cannot fight the Scourge. You do not have the weapons or the knowledge. You will die if you try to help me." Something changed in the human's eyes then, a hardness that made her suddenly aware of how foolish her words had been. "Lady, I've been dying my whole life," Marcus said quietly. "I've been hit so hard I couldn't remember my own name. I've buried people I loved. I've lost everything that ever mattered to me. So don't tell me about dying, because death and I are old friends." He stood up and walked to the window of his small dwelling, looking out at the empty desert beyond. "Way I see it. I got two choices," he continued. "I can hand you over to whoever comes looking, save my own skin, and go back to drinking myself to death in peace." "That would be the wise choice," Selythra said softly. "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "But I've never been accused of being wise. And I don't really feel like letting some space warlord win without a fight." She stared at him, trying to understand this strange creature in her world. Self-preservation was the highest law no Valorian would risk their life for a stranger, especially not for someone from an inferior species who offered nothing in return. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help me when you gain nothing from it?" Marcus turned back to face her, and there was something ancient in his eyes. Something that reminded her of the warrior kings from the old stories her mother used to tell. "Because someone has to," he said simply. "And because I'm tired of giving up." The next 3 days were the strangest of Selythra's long life. She healed slowly, her body working to repair the damage while Marcus watched over her like a protective beast. He was crude and uneducated by her standards, knowing nothing of quantum mechanics or interstellar navigation or any of the sciences she had mastered before her 100th birthday. He knew things that her people had forgotten. He knew how to survive in harsh conditions with almost nothing. He knew how to read the land and the sky and the subtle signs that revealed danger. Before it arrived, he knew how to fight with his bare hands, in ways that made her own royal guard look like children playing at war. She watched him train one morning, moving through combat forms despite the obvious pain in his back. And she realized that she had underestimated his species entirely. The Scourge hunters arrived on the 4th night. Selythra sensed them before she saw them, her weakened abilities still strong enough to detect the energy signatures of alien technology nearby. "They are here," she told Marcus, her voice tight with fear. He did not panic or ask questions. He simply grabbed the bag he had packed days ago and helped her to her feet. "Then we run," he said. "I know this desert better than anyone. We can lose them in the canyons to the north." They slipped out into the darkness just as lights appeared in the sky, strange craft descending toward the trailer behind them. She heard the sound of energy weapons and then the explosion as her savior's home was destroyed. But Marcus did not look back. He just kept moving, kept pulling her forward through the rocky terrain, his damaged body somehow finding the strength to carry them both. Over the following weeks, they became something Selythra had never expected. They became allies, then partners, then something that might have been friends if either of them had been willing to use that word. And slowly, Impossibly, the queen who had looked down on humanity began to see them through different eyes. The canyon hideout was nothing more than a shallow cave tucked into the red rock walls. But to Salithra, it felt like a palace. They had been running for 6 weeks now, moving from one temporary shelter to another, always staying one step ahead of the scourge hunters who scoured the desert for any sign of the fugitive Queen. Marcus had proven to be an extraordinary guide. He knew every trail and water source, every hidden valley and abandoned mine where they could rest without being detected. His knowledge of the land was as detailed as any map in her royal archives, all of it stored not in a computer, but in his remarkable human memory during the long hours of hiding. She had managed to repair her emergency beacon using parts from crashed hunted drones they had ambushed. Signal was weak, but it had reached her loyalist forces in the outer systems. Help was coming, but it would take at least 2 more months to arrive. Until then, she and Marcus would have to survive together. "Tell me about your world," she asked him one evening as they sat watching the stars appear above the canyon. "Not much to tell," Marcus replied, poking at the small fire he had built. "It's a mess, honestly. People fighting over land and money and religion, killing each other over things that don't matter. Same as it's always been." "Your species is violent," Salithra observed. "Yeah, we are," Marcus agreed without shame. "But we're other things too." He reached into his pack and pulled out a small device, one of the few possessions he had grabbed before they fled his home. "My daughter loved music," he said quietly, pressing a button that made sound emerge from the device. "She used to dance around the living room to this song. Drove her mother crazy, but I never got tired of watching her." The music was simple compared to the complex symphonies of the Valorian court, but there was something in it that made Salithra Sest feel tight, a human voice singing about love and loss and hope. Emotions so raw and honest that they cut through all her royal training and touched something deep inside her. "What happened to her?" she asked softly. "Your daughter." Marcus was quiet for a long time. "She got sick," he finally said. "Doctors tried everything, but nothing worked. She was only 7 years old when she died. 7 years that were worth more than my whole life." "I am sorry," Salithra said. And she meant it in a way she had never meant those words before. "Her name was Maya," Marcus continued. "She was afraid of the dark, so I used to tell her that stars were just nightlights that God put up to help brave little girls find their way home." He looked up at the sky, his scarred face soft with memory. "Now every time I see stars, I think of her up there somewhere, dancing in the light." Salithra did not know what to say her. People lived for thousands of years, and they had learned to distance themselves from death, to treat it as an inconvenience rather than a tragedy. But humans live such short lives, 80 years at most. And yet they loved with such fierce intensity that losing someone could break them completely. It seemed like madness, and yet somehow it also seemed beautiful. Over the following weeks, Marcus showed her more of his world, not through travel, since they could not risk being seen, but through stories and music and the few books he carried in his pack. He told her about human history, about wars fought and empires fallen, about scientists who unlocked the secrets of the universe and artists who captured the beauty of existence in paint and stone and words. Told her about ordinary people who had done extraordinary things. Mothers who lifted cars to save their children. Soldiers who threw themselves on grenades to protect their friends. Strangers who ran into burning buildings to rescue people they had never met. "Why?" Salithra asked again and again. "Why do your people sacrifice themselves for others?" "Because that's what makes us human," Marcus always replied. "We're weak and scared, and we die easy. But we look out for each other anyway. That's the whole point." She began to see patterns she had never noticed before. The Valorian Empire was ancient and powerful, but it had grown stagnant over the millennia. Her people had become so focused on preservation and tradition that they had forgotten how to truly live. They avoided risk and embraced comfort. They planned for centuries instead of moments. And somewhere along the way they had lost the fire that once made them great humans, or the opposite in every way. Their lives were brief candles in the darkness, burning fast and bright, and because they had so little time, they valued every second. They took risks. They fought impossible battles. They loved with abandon and grieved without restraint. They were gloriously, recklessly alive in a way her people had not been for thousands of years. "I have been a fool," she admitted to Marcus one night. "My empire has dismissed your species as primitives. But I think perhaps we are the ones who have fallen behind. We've got plenty of problems," Marcus said with a shrug. "Don't go putting us on a pedestal. I do not mean your technology or your politics," Selythra explained. "I mean your spirit, the thing inside you that refuses to surrender even when all hope is lost. My people have forgotten what that feels like." Marcus studied her face in the firelight. "That thing you're talking about, it's not special to humans," he said. "It's inside everyone, your people included. They've just buried it under too many years of playing it safe." "Perhaps," she agreed. "But it took a human to remind me that it exists." The next morning, her long-range scanner detected the Scourge flagship entering the solar system. Warlord Kethvorax had come personally to claim her, bringing enough firepower to glass the entire planet if necessary. The final battle was coming, and Selythra knew that one way or another, everything would be decided soon, but for the first time since her world fell apart. She was not afraid. She had learned something valuable from this broken human fighter who refused to stay down. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to fight anyway. And she had learned that sometimes the strongest warriors come from the most unexpected places. The Scourge dreadnought hung in the sky like a mountain made of darkness, blotting out the stars with its massive bulk. Selythra stood at the mouth of the canyon and watched smaller craft descend from the mothership. Dozens of dropships carrying hundreds of soldiers, all of them hunting for one wounded queen and her human protector. "That's a lot of bad guys," Marcus said calmly, checking the ammunition in the rifle he had taken from a dead hunter weeks ago. "Kethvorax commands the largest fleet in the collective," Selythra replied. "He would not risk coming here personally unless he was certain of victory." "Then let's make him regret that certainty." They had prepared for this moment as best they could. Marcus had spent days rigging the canyon with traps and explosives, using his knowledge of combat and terrain to create a killing ground that would give them every possible advantage. It would not be enough. Selythra knew that they were two against an army, and even the most clever traps could only slow down an enemy with superior numbers and firepower. But Marcus had taught her that sometimes the fight itself was what mattered. Win or lose, she had recovered her energy blade from the wreckage of a crashed hunter ship, and though her body was not fully healed, she could still wield it with deadly skill. Together, they would make the Scourge pay for every inch of ground they took. First wave came at dawn. Scourge soldiers poured into the canyon, their armor gleaming in the early light, their weapons humming with lethal energy. Marcus triggered the first trap, and the entrance collapsed in a thunderous explosion that buried the lead squad under tons of rock. The soldiers behind them scrambled for cover as Marcus opened fire from his elevated position, picking off targets with the calm precision of a man who had spent his life learning how to hurt people. Selythra moved like water through the chaos, her blade singing as it cut through honor and flesh. She had been trained in combat since childhood, but she had rarely needed to use those skills. Always protected by guards who fought and died in her place now, she understood what they had felt, the terror and the exhilaration, the strange clarity that came when death was close enough to touch. For 3 hours they held the canyon against everything. The Scourge threw at them. Marcus's traps claimed dozens of soldiers, and his rifle claimed dozens more as Selithra fought until her arms burned and her wounds reopened, until her crystalline blood stained the red rocks beneath her feet. But the enemy kept coming. Endless waves of soldiers who cared nothing for their own lives, as long as they achieved their mission. By midday, their ammunition was running low and their bodies were failing. Marcus had taken a shot to the shoulder that had shattered his collarbone, but he kept fighting with his offhand, too stubborn to fall. Selithra was bleeding from a dozen wounds, her energy fading with every swing of her blade. They retreated deeper into the canyon, fighting for every step, knowing that the end was near. And then the sky split open and HFY descended in a column of fire. The warlord was massive, easily twice the size of a normal Valorian, his body covered in the ceremonial scars of 1,000 battles. He wore armor made from the crystalline bones of his enemies, and he carried a war axe that crackled with dark energy. His eyes found Selithra, and his mouth twisted into a cruel smile. "Little queen," he rumbled in a voice like grinding stone, "your empire has fallen. Your allies have scattered. You have nothing left but this insignificant rock and this pathetic creature beside you. Surrender now, and I will make your death quick." "I would rather die fighting than live as your prisoner," Selithra replied, raising her blade with arms that trembled from exhaustion. "Then die. You shall." HFY moved faster than something so large should be able to move, crossing the distance between them in a heartbeat. His axe came down like a thunderbolt, and Selithra barely managed to deflect it, the impact driving her to her knees. He struck again and again, each blow harder than the last, and she knew that she could not hold him off for long. Then Marcus was there, slamming into the warlord from the side with all the force his broken body could muster. It was like watching a human attack a mountain. HFY turned and backhanded Marcus across the face, sending him flying into the canyon wall with a sickening crunch of breaking bones. "Marcus!" Selithra screamed, but the human was already rising, blood pouring from his nose and mouth, one arm hanging useless at his side. "Is that all you got?" he said through broken teeth, and somehow he was smiling. That infuriating human smile that refused to acknowledge defeat. HFY laughed, a sound like worlds dying. "You amuse me, little creature," he said. "You are weak and fragile, and you know you cannot win. Yet still you stand. Why?" "Because that's what humans do," Marcus replied, raising his one good fist. "We stand up, we fight. And when we get knocked down, we stand up again. Then I will enjoy knocking you down until you can no longer rise." What followed was not a battle. It was a punishment. HFY beat Marcus with casual cruelty, breaking bones and tearing flesh with every strike. The human fell and rose, fell and rose, fell and rose, each time slower than the last, but always somehow finding the strength to get back on his feet. Selithra tried to help, but scourged soldiers held her back, forcing her to watch as the man who had saved her was destroyed piece by piece. And yet through it all, Marcus never stopped fighting, even when both his arms were broken. He threw himself at the warlord with his shoulder, even when his legs gave out. He crawled forward and bit HFY's ankle with bloody teeth. The warlord's amusement faded into confusion, then into something that looked almost like fear. "What are you?" he demanded. "How can you still move?" Marcus looked up at him with eyes that burned like stars. "I'm a human," he said, "and I don't know how to quit." With his last ounce of strength, Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a detonator, the explosives he had hidden in the canyon walls, the ones he had been saving for exactly this moment. "For Maya," he whispered, and pressed the button. The world turned to thunder and fire as the canyon collapsed around them. Selithra felt the scourged soldiers release her as they scrambled for safety. And then rocks were falling everywhere, and she was running toward Marcus, even though she knew it was too late. The last thing she saw before the dust swallowed everything was Marcus Cole, broken and bleeding and smiling, disappearing beneath an avalanche of stone that buried him and HFY together. Then there was only darkness and the sound of a queen screaming. Sci-Fi dug through the rubble with her bare hands until her crystalline skin cracked and bled. She did not care about the pain or the scourged soldiers watching her with confused expressions or the dust that filled her lungs with every breath. She only cared about finding him. The Loyalist fleet had arrived just minutes after the explosion, dropping out of hyperspace like avenging angels and tearing through the leaderless scourge forces with devastating efficiency without HFY to command them. The collective soldiers had panicked and scattered, their invasion collapsing as quickly as it had begun. But none of that mattered to Sci-Fi. Kept digging, her royal robes torn and filthy, her crown lost somewhere in the chaos. Her only thought the human who had given everything for her. "Your Majesty," one of her officers called out. "We have secured the area. The enemy is in full retreat. Your shuttle awaits. Help me dig," she commanded without looking up. "There is someone under here." The officer hesitated, clearly confused by his queen's behavior. "Your Majesty, with respect, if someone was under all this rock, they would surely be. Help me dig." Sci-Fi screamed, and the raw emotion in her voice silenced every soldier within earshot. They dug for 2 hours before they found him. Marcus Cole was buried under 1,000 pounds of stone, his body broken in ways that should have meant instant death, but somehow, impossibly, he was still breathing. Sci-Fi knelt beside him as her medical officers rushed to stabilize his shattered form, their advanced technology working desperately to keep his fragile human body alive. His eyes opened, unfocused and dim, and found her face. "Did we win?" he whispered through bloody lips. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her crystalline cheeks. "You killed HFY. You saved my life. You won." Marcus smiled, that same stubborn smile she had come to know so well. "Good," he said. "That's good." Then his eyes closed and the medical officers were shouting, and Sci-Fi was pushed aside as they fought to save him. 3 months later, Queen Sci-Fi stood before the gathered nobles of the Valorian Empire in the great throne room of the restored capital. She had retaken her throne with the help of loyalist forces who rallied to her cause. Inspired by the story of her survival against impossible odds, the Scourge Collective had fragmented without their warlord, their rebellion collapsing into infighting and chaos. The Empire was wounded, but it would recover. But Sci-Fi had not called this assembly to discuss politics or war. She had called it to introduce someone. "Bring him forward," she commanded. The great doors opened, and Marcus Cole entered the throne room in a hover chair that carried his broken body with gentle care. He could no longer walk, the damage to his spine too severe even for Valorian medicine to fully repair. He could no longer fight. His arms healed, but forever weakened by the trauma they had suffered. He was a shadow of the warrior he had once been, and yet somehow he seemed larger than ever. The nobles murmured as he approached the throne, many of them confused or even offended by the presence of a human in their sacred hall. "This creature comes from a world called Earth," Sci-Fi announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "His species lives for less than a century and possesses no technology worth mentioning. They are young and violent and by our standards completely insignificant." She paused, letting the nobles absorb her words. "And yet this man saved my life," she continued. "When I was hunted and alone, he protected me. When I was wounded and helpless, he healed me. When all hope was lost and death came for us both, he gave everything he had to ensure my survival." She descended from her throne and walked to stand beside Marcus, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. He asked for nothing in return, she said softly. He expected no reward. He simply saw someone who needed help, and he helped them. Because that is what humans do. The throne room was silent. every noble hanging on her words. I have ruled this empire for 3,000 years, Silithra said. I have led armies and negotiated treaties, and watched civilizations rise and fall. I thought I understood what strength meant. But I was wrong. She looked down at Marcus, her eyes shining with emotion. Strength is not about power or technology or how long you live, she declared. Strength is about the choice to fight for something greater than yourself. Even when you know you might lose, even when the odds are impossible, even when giving up would be so much easier. She turned back to face her nobles. This human taught me that lesson, she said. And because of what he sacrificed, I am changing the empire forever. Over the following year, the reformed Silithra introduced transformed Valorian society. Earth was granted protected status and brought into the empire as an equal partner. Not a primitive world to be studied, and ignored human ambassadors were welcomed in the capital. And cultural exchange programs brought the two species together in ways no one had imagined possibles. Some nobles resisted the changes, unable to accept that a younger species could have anything to teach them, but most came to see the wisdom in their queen's vision. Humanity's fierce spirit and relentless determination inspired a renaissance. Among the Valorian people, they remembered what it meant to truly live, to take risks and fight for what mattered, to love with passion and create with abandon. The empire grew stronger, not in spite of humanity's influence, but because of it, and through it all. Marcus Cole remained at Queen Silithra's side. She named him her chief advisor, a position that made him the most influential human in the Voida galaxy. He had no formal education and no understanding of interstellar politics. But he had something far more valuable. He had perspective. Reminded her every day that titles and power meant nothing if they were not used to help people. He reminded her that the smallest act of kindness could change the universe. He reminded her that strength was measured not by what you could take, but by what you were willing to give. Years passed and Marcus grew old, while Silithra remained unchanged, her crystalline body immune to the aging that slowly claimed him. She knew that one day she would lose him, that his brief human life would end, and she would have to go on without him. But she had learned from him that the length of a life did not determine its value. What mattered was how that life was spent. On his last night, Marcus sat with her in the Row Gardens, looking up at the stars. His body was frail and his hair had turned white, but his eyes still held that same stubborn fire she had first seen in the Nevada desert so long ago. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything you gave." Marcus smiled, that same crooked smile she had fallen in love with. "I didn't give anything," he replied. "I just refused to give up." He reached out and took her hand, his weathered fingers warm against her crystalline skin. "Promise me something," he said. "Anything. Don't forget what I taught you," Marcus said. "Don't let your people go back to playing it safe and living forever without really living. Keep fighting, keep taking risks. Keep being human even though you're not." "I promise," Silithra whispered. Marcus looked up at the stars one last time, and she knew he was thinking of Maya, dancing somewhere in that infinite light. "You know," he said quietly, "I think she would have liked you. I wish I could have met her." "Maybe you will someday," Marcus said. "Maybe that's what stars are. Nightlights God put up to help brave little girls find their way home." He closed his eyes and let out a long, peaceful breath, and Queen Silithra held his hand as the last human fighter finally stopped fighting, finally rested, finally went home to dance among the stars with his daughter. She did not weep, because he had taught her that endings were not always sad. Sometimes they were just the beginning of a different story. And his story, the story of a broken man who gave everything for a queen from the stars, would echo through the universe forever.